Hello, everyone. Today is December 1st, 2017, and I'm going to be reading and discussing an article I wrote in 1999 for the very last issue of Temple Doors. It's a Thoth Akashic remembrance, you might say, and it has to do with the Cathair stone, which is what the Thoth Akasha is calling the Stone of Destiny, and also the figure of Sha'Maia-NEAAF. She's given the name in this article of PrincessTea because that's a name that she's been commonly called throughout history, but it's really Sha'Maia-NEAAF. I was guided to bring this up again because her name surfaced in a particular event, and I will be giving more information on this connection in the future. But now is not the time to bring that forward. However, that's the reason this came up. So I thought I would go ahead and make this video so that it's the basis for information for a future video. So here we go. The Cathair stone is the ancient Celtic name for what was originally a foundation stone within the Rutan Sun Temple of Atlantis. Ruta was the only Atlantean isle which ascended at the time of Atlantis' final destruction. The Cathair stone was taken from Atlantis near her end days and brought to the main Hebridean mystery temple on the Isle of Lewis. Here it remained for many centuries, serving as an energy node facilitating the initiates in their consciousness connection with the Rutan ascended masters, their forefathers. It stood as a shining beacon of testimony to the authority of the temple craft in Albion. Albion, of course, being the British Isles. Archetypally, the Stone of Destiny is the foundation stone of the temple. It bears the truth, the proof of divine succession on the earth as it testifies in stone. In other words, the succession is recorded in matter, and the linkage to the spiritual hierarchy through the divine charge held within the stone allows certain individuals to access the Akashic and genetic information necessary to determine true Grail lineage and thus succession. And there's a little footnote here that I'm going to read. This is witnessed in the activity of the morgues described in the article entitled The Grail, Alpha and Omega, subheading The Grail in Albion, the British Isles, volume 98 of Temple Doors. To continue, there are various destiny stones located in many different countries, their origins being just as diverse. These other stones of destiny are usually pieces of original temple foundation stone which survive the various deluges. Just previous to and after the time of Atlantis' demise, Hibernia became the temple ground or centerpiece of sacred presence for all the Isles of Albion. The priests and priestesses there were true representatives of the remaining light of the world, which had managed to remain comparatively pure and undefiled during the Atlantean conflicts between the Solarians and the Nephilim. Now, this whole conflict between the Solarians and Nephilim thing, this is an area that I haven't really fleshed in all these years, because there's a lot to, look at. But apparently there were some Nephilimic wars, and we can translate Nephilim, well, generally to the Anunnaki in some ways. They're part of that anyway. And the Nephilimic wars have not been filled in very well at all for me from the Thoth extreme, but I've come to feel that they are related, obviously more than related. They probably represent the wars that are in the Indian texts, about the spaceships and the nuclear events that seem to have transpired in those days. I think this is what is being referred to here. So, to continue, however, it was not long before The Dark Order made their shadow known on the Isles of Albaon as well. At first they were not allowed upon Hibernia. The Dark Order attracted and largely brought their own following with them, but had no real authority with the indigenous peoples of the Isles, and their weaknesses were obvious. They conspired to destroy the Hibernian people of the Isles, and I'm sorry, I didn't read that properly. Let me go back. They conspired to destroy the Hibernian temple complex and to steal the Cathair stone. They wished to simply take over these temples for themselves, as the temples and grounds had been saturated with over 1,000 years of Metatronic Christic light work, such as chanting and working sacred Metatronic light matrices into the earth and stones of the sanctified structures. Thus, these grounds and temples would not lend themselves well to the power violation of their dark deeds if left intact. The Dark Order decided to make it a hit-and-run affair instead. There was much intrigue and several failed attempts, but finally they were successful. Not only was the Cathair stone taken from its rightful abode, but the temples were greatly damaged. Although Hibernia would remain a temple ground for a period longer, it was never again to regain its former glory. Those who stole the stone falsely sought to claim succession from the Ruden priests and priestesses for themselves. It was broken into pieces and taken into Germania, Germany, Scotland, and other locations to serve various tribes as a symbol of royal succession. Some of these claims to succession were valid, while others were merely manufactured to serve the goals of those who sought the power for themselves. Boy, isn't that still going on? Okay. A portion of the Cathair stone was taken to Scotland, was brought to Fortingall, where it still remains. Once it stood in the center of the Dirth Ben, or sacred circle of Arum Fortis, a name used for the ancient Grail settlement near the current town of Fortingall. Well, that's interesting because Arum Fortis, of course, is also a Grail legend name of a character, a person in the Grail legend, but in Grail story, I should say, because some of it's legend, some of it's true. But also, more recently, it was the name given to the one of the hosting skulls of our Osiris Arising project. And so to continue, it was taken out of the Dirth Ben, where we're talking about the Cathair stone here now, when there was a threat to the Arum Fortis community, and moved to another location. The stone was placed upon a sacred hill, not far from the current town of Fortingall, but has long since fallen over and is now buried through natural processes within this mound. Now, of course, we're talking about pieces of this whole stone, a portion of the stone. Returning to the main thread of the story, not only was the main Cathair stone taken in pieces from the Hibernian temple site, but so were other stones from the temple buildings themselves. These stones were considered to contain the power of the sacred spiritual practices there, but when they were separated from the main temple and sacred ground they had stood upon, the Dark Order was then able to violate that power and use it for their own purposes. These stones now exist in all shapes and sizes, as most were hacked down for easy transport. They can be found in the British Isles, as well as many other locations throughout the world. These temple stones were not considered to contain the power to determine the right to rule, as did the Cathair stones, but they were nevertheless valuable talismans. Indeed, they do possess the sacred fire codes of the original Hibernian mysteries. There is one part of the Cathair stone which is engraved with Ruden symbols, the capstone, which was atop the original monolith in the Ruden Sun Temple. It is of the same monolithic meteor stone, but it was originally quite highly polished, much more so than the rest of the stone. And I turn a page here, is the piece which now lies beneath Arthur's castle. It is very worn now, and the symbols are barely visible. Even by the time of Merlin received it, this part of the stone had shown signs of being poorly cared for. This was due to the fact that for a very long period of time, it had been in the possession of those who did not understand its true sacredness. This capstone portion is what later became known as the Terra stone. Additional information on these topics to follow. There were 16 pieces of the Cathair stone originally in existence directly after it had been broken down by the raiding thieves. Some of the very small pieces, which came into existence the size of a silver dollar or so, were broken off the 16 larger original fragments later in time. As previously stated, the Cathair stone is of a meteoric origin. Because various pieces have been exposed to vastly different environments through the passage of time, their coloration is not exactly the same now as it once was. There would be noticeable difference between them should they be placed side by side again today. They are mostly various shades of darkish green, some almost black with deep green highlights. Other pieces are more in the range of a dark gray. The original Cathair stone itself was cut from a larger meteorite of which the inner part contained a higher concentration of iron than the remainder of the monolithic stone. The stone was cut from this meteorite in such a way that the inner matrix was revealed cross-sectionally on one portion of it and was exquisitely beautiful when it was first crafted. Many of these pieces are currently lost beneath bogs or oceans, some of the smaller fragments buried under ages of soil deposition, etc. Eventually, 3 of these pieces returned to the British Isles via the adventures of the prophet Jeremiah, PrincessTea, who is our Sha'Maia-NEAAF, and Baruch, or additional information to follow again, one of which is now known as the Stone of Destiny or Coronation Stone. And so now we read about the Stone of Destiny and King David. The first king of Israel, Saul, sought to kill the young David as he was jealous of the latter's favor among the people of Israel. As a result, David was forced to flee into the wilderness, where he became a Robin Hood figure of his day until Saul and his son Jonathan were killed in battle. At that point, David returned to eventually become king of Israel. During David's exile into the desert wilderness, he became disoriented from a fever. At that time, he was alone and subsequently fell from a cliff. Unconscious but not seriously injured, he awoke some time later to find himself in the care of an old hermit. The hermit had obviously been expecting the young man, as he told him many things about David's past, including that he was from the lineage of the Elbar kings, Atlantean Grail priest kings. The hermit proceeded to inform David that God had sent him, David, to this place so that what was rightfully his by succession could be placed into his keeping. The old hermit called himself, okay, here we go, Maya, Zibarduka, then led David to a small opening in a rock crevasse several miles away. The 2 men crawled in the dark some distance inside until they were able to stand. At this point, Zibarduka lit a torch to reveal a large cavern. In it, laying on its side, was the piece of the Cathair stone containing the capstone. However, it was far too large to be moved by David and Zibarduka alone, nor could they have managed to drag it through the narrow passageway, which indicates to me that it was brought in through another way in the cavern. Zibarduka told David to leave the stone where it was, and when he was ready to assume the throne of Israel, the stone would be delivered to him. David was disbelieving, and yet he had no choice but to leave the stone. Upon the day of his coronation, a team of men and horses delivered the stone to David. These men could not be persuaded to speak of their mission or that they had any knowledge of Zibarduka. How was the stone moved from the cave? Not by magic. There was another opening. Yeah, there we go. Not far from the first, that was directly above the cave. The stone had only to be dragged by several strong men a few feet and hoisted through the use of levers and ropes to the surface. It required a certain amount of manpower, but no feat of levitation. Zibarduka did not wish David to know of the more accessible entrance, for he wisely deduced the rashness of the young man and wished to ensure that David would know of the stone and see it with his own eyes, but make no move to take it until the day it was to be his. Thus Zibarduka and his colleagues, for he was not the hermit he appeared to be, made sure no light seeped through the upper level opening, which would have alerted David to the second entrance. At the time, David's meeting with Zibarduka and his incarnated Let me try that again. At the time of David's meeting with Zarbaduka, his incarnated entity consisted of only one soul. Before the day of his kingship, however, he would be latticed with two more souls, one being that of Thoth. My, Thoth does get around. He seems to be latticed with a lot of beings. We have King David, we have Merlin and Quetzalcoatl and Enoch, just to name a few, I imagine. Okay, so Zarbaduka was a holy man and a prophet, but he was also Grail-born and a member of a sacred order that kept track of and guided Grail lineages into fruition. Known in that day as the order of, oh my gosh, Melhod Sofer. However, it had also been called by many other names and is in existence to this day as the Order of Zain, Z-A-I-N, which is the name it was given by the shepherd kings of Egypt. I'm just getting tired reading it all. Okay, so we continue. The physical Order of Zain comes directly under the Inner Planes Order of Johannine Corpus of the Rose Mystica, and even more specifically under the branch of that order known as the Guild of Beth El. The definition of the Order of Johannine Corpus and the Guild of Beth El are as follows. Johannine Corpus of the Rose Mystica, a gathering of 6 groups of souls in a 12 vibration for the total of vibration of 72. These are souls from this planetary realm who have dedicated their incarnative power to the quickening or awakening of the Johannine consciousness in the earth. They are also very much a part of the Grail archetypification on earth, yet they are of this earth, at least in their many aeons of incarnational service. Of course, this whole Johannine thing, that's a whole other topic, and we won't get into here, but it is based on the name Johannine comes from the Apostle John, but also the John of Revelations, as the 1 and 2 are same. I'm never quite sure if they're the same incarnation or the same soul, but they're one and the same. But it represents the new era coming after the Petrine Church. We had the Johannine, and actually, I shouldn't even say a new era. It sort of is, but is because it's of what it proclaims. But they were contemporaries in actual physical incarnation, of course. The Guild of Bethel, record keepers composed of members of the Johannine Corpus, whose directive is to preserve and work with all knowledge and history under the Bethel Trinity Star tetrahedron. This is a sacred geometry consciousness that was overlaid with the earth in 2023 BC. Wow, we're almost coming up to 1,000 years. Am I correct about that? Well, I don't know. With BC, that means something else. Anyway, I'm not going to get off on those ruminations. Let me start over. This is a sacred geometry consciousness that was overlaid with the earth in 2023 BC. In essence, it is the memory circuitry that aligns the Christos ray with the undivided realms within the cube of stars. Okay, then we have the cube of stars, which I've referred to before. And I'm not going to go into that now. It's referencing the Grail and Alpha and Omega, subheading the Bethel star configuration in volume 98 of Temple Doors. So you'd have to go there to, read all of that. All of this material is so extensive, it's hard to just capsulize anything. But so we're just going to continue. I'm just taking a moment to read this other footnote to see if it's of any direct importance. Really, it isn't. We could go on and on with all of the stuff. I'm trying to get to the basic meat of everything, so I'm turning a page again. I'm sorry, it must sound very loud on the recorder. Okay, as an interesting side note, Jacob of the Old Testament was also a member of the Order of Zain and used several old Hibernian temple stone pieces in his initiatory work, but they should not be mistaken for Jacob's pillar. He also he also sanctified and created new temple stones through his knowledge of the Atlantean art of infusing stone with cosmic and earth power. Okay, now we go on to the Terra stone, stone of destiny. The original Terra stone of Ireland was part of the Cathair stone, which had been broken into these three pieces in order to be transported by sea to Ireland. Once the three pieces had arrived and had been carefully put back together, it stood at Terra. When this piece of the Cathair stone was reassembled, it contained the capstone portion of the original. After serving some time at Terra, it was dismantled once again for purposes of safekeeping. One of these pieces found its way to Fortingall, another to Arthur's Castle on the Isle of Man, and another became the original coronation stone of the Scottish kings. There was a later Terra stone which took the place of the first. It was not from the original Cathair stone, but rather was a regular temple stone from the Hibernian complex. Previous information on the Terra stone can be found in issues 3-493 Temple Doors. We quote some of that, which is most pertinent here for your convenience. And this is the quote from 3-493 of Temple Doors. The Stone of Destiny, speaking of the Terra stone, is a representation of the cornerstone of the future temple contained within the two arcs, the Ark of Grace and the lesser version Thoth refers to as the Ark of Karma. Pepper and Wilcox, author of Magical Mystical Sites, recounts an invasion of the Tuatha De Danann by the Milesians, who sailed from Corona in Spain. They came, and we're quoting here, they came in a fleet of 30 ships bearing a flag depicting a dead serpent and the rod of Moses. So the record of Thoth reveals that the Danann, or tribe of Dan, were in conflict with the invading generation of Ashur, the Milesians. This occurred in pre-Davidic times. Together they had once been charged as guardians of the cornerstone. The Ashur Milesians had come not to avenge the death of a chief, as the legend says, but to assume what they considered to be their rightful powers through the cornerstone of the future temple. They won at least the terrestrial battle. Magical and Mystical Sites states, quote, from this book, the legend says that Tuatha De Danann disappeared, retreating into caves and underground haunts. Thoth declares that at first they did go underground, but eventually stepped through the veil as they increasingly intermingled with the original city fairy nature beings until both became one. Now, we continue back with volume 199 of Temple Doors, and it states, while the Danann did not have the true physical right to rule stone when the Milesians attacked, they did possess the signs and seals which gave them authority over this stone in spirit. They also possessed some of the other Hibernian temple stones. The Milesians sought to claim this right to rule and to usurp the territory of the Danann with it. The Milesians controlled much of the Ireland at the time. By the time Jeremiah and PrincessTea arrived with the parts of the stone they possessed. However, the Milesians continued to allow certain remaining segments of the Tuatha De Danann tribes to officiate as priests and priestesses over the sacred sites, for they had come to a reckoning with the right of the Danann as keepers of the sacred, so long as they, the Milesians, were rulers of the sacred. In a book entitled The Stone of Destiny by Pat Gerber, there is an ancient Bible story related about a PrincessTea and the prophet Jeremiah fleeing to Egypt from a besieged Israel around 585 BC with the stone. PrincessTea was the daughter of the king of Israel, Zedekiah, from the house of David. The prophet Jeremiah, along with PrincessTea and Jeremiah's scribe Baruch, which is Simon Breck, left Egypt just ahead of the invading Nebuchadnezzar. Pat Gerber speculates that their only course under that desperate situation would have been to embark upon a journey by sea, likely being transported by the seafaring Phoenicians, whom he refers to also as the tribe of Dan. Pat Gerber goes on to relate another historical accounting of an old prophet having landed at Ulster Island, which is in the northern edge of the Phoenicians' west coast sea route. He was also called Olham Fodhal by the people of Ulster, meaning professor, doctor, or learned man. This history accounting tells us that he was made a king in the year 1526 BC. The record of Thoth also reveals that Jeremiah founded a school of prophets in the region of Terah, where he established laws which were apparently based on the Ten Commandments. According to Pat Gerber in The Stone of Destiny, the princess also arrived with an impressive harp, which he goes on to point out was once the emblem of David, later the emblem of Ireland. It is said that this harp is still buried at Tara, where the Cathair stone pieces, which the Irish called the Leah were reassembled and positioned as a talisman of power, the Tara stone. Well, it's interesting because I look at this Leela Thale, at least the one that's being claimed now, and I don't see doesn't look like it's ever been in pieces. So the only thing I can think of is that they knew how to assemble stones. You know, they had the way that the stones were liquefied to build the pyramids of Giza and all of that, this ancient technology. Some of it might have still been available to them so that they, putting together these stones, taking them apart, putting them together, it sounds really crazy unless they had this particular skill, The original Phoenicians were descended from Atlanteans, as were the tribe of Dan, and they had some Dan kinsmen among them. However, the Phoenicians were largely a mixed people by the time of Jeremiah and Princess Tea's arrival in Alba-On. Jeremiah and Princess Tea, now this is, from Thoth, all of this is from Thoth. Jeremiah and Princess Tea did bring the piece of the Cathair stone, which had been in Solomon's temple, containing the capstone portion of the whole original Cathair stone, back to the Isles of Alba-On. It had been their intention to take it all the way to Hibernia, but they were blown off course in a violent storm and cast ashore in Ireland. There they remain. Let us take a closer look at this story as revealed by the record of Thoth. Princess Tea was indeed a descendant of David and Solomon, her father being King Zedekiah of Israel, as indicated in the aforementioned book. The stone had remained in the family since the days of David. The situation developing in Jerusalem necessitated the removal of the stone from the area. Princess Tea, Jeremiah, and the scribe Baruch, Simon Breck, managed to quickly move the stone to the Isles of Alba-On. The expedition of their transport of this large stone under duress was made possible by the following circumstances. At the time of Nebuchadnezzar's final siege of Jerusalem, there had already been several attempts to take the city. This was the fatal blow in a long struggle between the two nations. Consequently, the stone and many other sacred treasures had already been removed from the temple in Jerusalem and were sequestered in caves within the desert near the Dead Sea. Once these refugees and their small company of servants reached the hidden caves, they were able to collect the stone and some other rare artifacts and scrolls before departing for Egypt. Because of the lack of the task of transporting the stone, little else could be carried, however. Although the stone was heavy, they had made preparations in advance to transport it. They also knew some techniques for making objects lighter in weight through the use of vibrational harmonics. The process may have been tedious, but they were successful, for they had help along the way from the members of the Order of Zane. So here we go. I was speculating, because I haven't read this in years, I was speculating they had some of these, knowledges. So if they were able to make the stones lighter, they were also able to liquefy them. When I say liquefied, I don't mean like a soup, but, to make them somewhat liquid. So that means this is how at least they were putting things, taking them apart and putting them back together again. They weren't hacking things into and using super glue to put them back together again. It's kind of a Humpty Dumpty story here, isn't it? Princess Tea and the prophet Jeremiah knew that Nebuchadnezzar would have suspected that, and I'm going to turn a page, sorry. Here we go. Suspected that they had the stone with them by the time they arrived in Egypt, or perhaps even have tortured the truth from some of those left behind. Nebuchadnezzar was very much wanted this treasure above all others in the taking of Jerusalem, and was expected to try and obtain it at any cost. Nebuchadnezzar was quite anxious to possess the Cathair stone, as it was a talisman of power, a kingmaker. Also, Nebuchadnezzar had read the scrolls of Sennacherib, a prior Assyrian ruler, in which the latter had spoken of another root stone that became the cornerstone of the temple Kyi'Ra in the ancient Rutan Assyrian city of Kyi'Ra. The city of Nineveh would later be built by Ashurbanipal II atop the ruins of Kyi'Ra. Now, Kyi'Ra is a name that Thoth has given me many years ago, and I've never, found it written in any historical information or archaeological information about the Middle East. But this is the name that Thoth gives to this ancient ruin that was originally built by Atlanteans, which is underneath the ruin, the now ruined city of Nineveh. So, to quote from issue 3492 of Temple Doors, regarding Sennacherib's written account of his dream, as translated from the record of Thoth by me. And here it is. There, from the gate of Sivivina, came a world maker, striding a ravine of molten fire, blocking the sun with his mighty form. Near the base of his left foot, there arose a Kab, holy etheric stone, spitting forth red fire from the center of the earth. I was prostrate upon the ground, drenched in the dew of his brow. As I stretched to touch the stone, he spake to me in lightning. No man shall touch the stone until the day of man is risen. For herein, in the verse of life that was lost in the first day of the world, shall not be sung until the last day is upon the kingmakers. So I think I might have read that wrong. For herein is the verse of life, which was lost in the first day of the world, and shall not be sung until the last day is upon the kingmakers. That's what the being said to Sennacherib in his dream. And then Sennacherib continues to say, I was fearful and lay upon the ground. In my heart I knew I was not the one to make the stone sing. Now that's the end of the quote of this dream that from the Thothic record that Sennacherib had. So now we continue with the 1999 article. Therefore, Nebuchadnezzar knew the true cosmic power of such root and temple stones and would go to the ends of the earth to obtain one of them. When they reached the Egyptian port, we're back, I didn't say it here, it's confusing, but we're back to PrincessTea, rather, Tamar Tefi and her little group with Jeremiah. When they reached the Egyptian port, they wasted no time, for they knew Sorry about that. These words are really getting to me. Nebuchadnezzar might easily catch up with them. Arrangements had been made prior to their arrival to leave on Phoenician ships for the Isles of Albaon. It was at this point that the stone was hewn into 3 pieces, one portion to be placed on each side of the 3 ships. This accomplished, the 3 PrincessTea, Jeremiah, and Baruch separately boarded one of the ships, each with 1/3 portion of the stone. And obviously they had other people accompanying them. The reason they chose the Isles of Albaon as their destination was because of PrincessTea's mother, whose true name was Arieli, Arieli, Arieli. She had been from a tribe of people who had migrated originally from Hibernia. Jeremiah had been Arieli's guardian and mentor, and as such had been included in the dowry of the marriage agreement between Arieli and Zedekiah, along with some ancient scrolls relating the history of the Cathair stone, the Hebridean temples, and the ancient Rutan province of Atlantis. The scrolls mentioned a remaining temple colony on the Isle of Lewis, which, according to Jeremiah's visions, they believed still existed. Jeremiah was a true seer, and thus his visions carried a great deal of influence. If this were true, they reasoned that they would be rejoining a family branch of their Grail lineage, and returning the right of rule to the land destined to receive the sacred stone at that time. Thus, the primary directive of Jeremiah's visions was that he, Baruch, and PrincessTea must return the stone to the sacred temple ground of Hibernia. This was God's will. Jeremiah's visions indicated that the Grail lineage of David had been violated and PrincessTea's family murdered because the stone had been torn from its sacred place by the Dark Order many centuries before, thus setting certain karmic forces into motion. In order to put things right for themselves and for the people and family they left behind, they knew they must return the stone and teach the lost colony what they knew concerning their shared heritage. This was how Jeremiah interpreted his visions. Once they had been at sea for a while, however, he began to realize that something was wrong. He grew restless and could not sleep or eat. PrincessTea and Baruch feared for the older man's life and sanity. Then a storm came upon them. It was during this storm that Jeremiah suddenly knew they had been heading for the wrong isle. Within this newfound insight, he now saw that they would not reach Hibernia, but by the hand of God, by the hand of God would be placed in the midst of the true people of Ireland, who that were the rightful guardians of the great stone of David, the Cathair stone. Of course, I don't think it was called Ireland then, but this is a narrative. Even though it seemed that their lives were in great peril during the storm, the prophet was at peace now, for he knew that God would bring them to the shore of the old ones, the race of the Elbar kings, from whom David had descended, his Atlantean descendants. The Danann were called by other names previous to this time, but they were essentially the same people that had originated in Hibernia along with their distant ancestors, although their distant ancestors were Hyperborean Atlanteans. Jeremiah was recognized for who he was by the holy men and women of the Danann, and the Milesians were inclined to believe the Danann in this matter as well. Now, this it doesn't say here, I kind of skip into this, but obviously they landed, okay? They arrived in Ireland, and now this is taking place. Jeremiah was made a Grail priest king. The Milesians may have been off course in their usurpation of Ireland through violent centuries earlier, but they did recognize the spiritual authority of the righteous ones in certain matters. They knew that as they beheld Jeremiah, so they beheld a holy man and a guardian of the sacred stone. The Milesians, I'm probably totally butchering that name, but that's what I'm calling them. The Milesians were also from the generations of Ruda, and thus the Hibernian holy people, as were the Danann. They had mixed feelings in regard to the terrible battle and defeat of the Danann at their hands centuries earlier. Many among the wise men of the Milesians felt that God would curse them for this act against their brethren. Thus Jeremiah arriving with the stone was a sign of saving grace for them, like God had forgiven them, so to speak. While Jeremiah may not have been directly related to David, although indirectly he was, they were all Grail born. He was directly related to the Danann, as was PrincessTea. Because of the Danann blood in their veins, Jeremiah, PrincessTea, and Baruch were able to naturally live very long lifespans within the more usual advanced signs, without the more usual. Let me try that again. Without the more usual advanced signs of aging. In Ireland, PrincessTea became regarded as a queen, Grail queen in her own right, and was recognized for her Davidic Grail bloodline. However, as was the custom of the Milesians of that time, she was not revealed openly, but instead was represented in all outer matters by the priest king Jeremiah, a carryover from the Mazur traditions which came down through the Morongs. Hers was the path of the initiator in the most holy Danann temples. She also taught the ways of sacred tradition to future priestesses and other females of the clan. Jeremiah indeed established the school of prophets at Tara, Ireland. This was a mystery school of both Mazurothic and Atlantean Grail consciousness. It was called Halitha, meaning to bring forth into the light. While it was not one of the 12 ordained Masorethic mystery schools, it nevertheless played a key role in seeding the earth's consciousness with the mystery of the Masoret. The Masoret is of course, the Hebraic word for the 12 zodiacal signs is holy houses. This school of prophets hosted many souls who would carry to fruition knowledge gathered in the smelting pot of the Halitha focus. These souls carried this knowledge in many forms and in many lands through their various subsequent incarnations. The Halitha was not considered by the hierarchy to be one of the officially ordained 12 Masorethic mystery schools because it was a later completion of the earlier Hibernian mystery school, which was one of the primary 12. So really, it was just like, okay, this is to be continued, and now it is being continued through the Halitha. So in that sense, it was one of the primary, but not standing as of itself. It was part of the Hibernian original Masorethic school. Now that I've made that perfectly clear, we'll continue. Okay, let's see, another page turn. This one is entitled The Harp of David. PrincessTea brought a harp to Kyi'Ra along with the stone, as alluded to in the book The Stone of Destiny by Pat Gerber. According to the record of Thoth, this was indeed the Harp of David, which had been given to him by the priestess Mirabel. It was an Atlantean harp that had long been in the keeping of the priestcraft of Jerush. PrincessTea brought this harp from the cache of treasures near the Dead Sea. The harp was exquisitely made from an alloy of alchemically altered metals. It was therefore impervious to the ravages of time. Properly played, the tones from this musical instrument were extremely healing and could induce altered states of reality, which were aligned to higher Metatronic Christic consciousness. The harp eventually fell into the hands of the bard Taliesin, who was a direct descendant of PrincessTea. In the days of PrincessTea's life at Tara, the harp was named Brodkai, which meant dancing spirit. Taliesin came by the Atlantean Harp of David through Merlin, who appeared to him in a dream and revealed the location of the harp to the bard. Taliesin then made a journey to Tara Island, where the harp was hidden, and retrieved it. Now, before we continue, and I don't actually know that I'm going to read, I don't know that I'm going to read the rest of this because I really wanted to read the part that concerned PrincessTea, and this just goes on and on. So I don't know. Let me see. I'm going to put this on pause for a moment and see where we're going with all of this. Yeah, I think I'm going to conclude here. If you want to read the rest, you'll have to go to Temple Doors Volume 199, 1999. It's the only volume. I only put out one in 1999. And Portal members can retrieve it in the Vault of Thoth. Actually, it's not available in any other way right now. So anyway, but in conclusion here, I have not read a lot about Tamar Tefi, who is PrincessTea. But in scanning some things, I see that some texts say, oh, well, they really brought the Ark of the Covenant there and it's buried there. Well, obviously that's not the case, at least not according to my Thothic record. That's the only thing I can go by here that I'm going to follow. And but there is a connection. I asked Thoth, well, is there a connection that could have been brought forward in this whole piece? So there is. So how Thoth is explaining it to me now, or what I'm receiving from the Thothic stream, is that in the sense of the connection to the sacred on, we could call PrincessTea, or rather Tamar Tefi, Aka PrincessTea, the sacred on. When the ark was brought to Ireland by this voyage, PrincessTea was the ark. Now let me explain that. She was of the school of the Order of the Sacred On. I'm going to call it that. I don't know what they called it, but I have actually written about it. Yes, I've written about it, but I don't know that the time period when that order was originated and all that was long before PrincessTea. But what I'm receiving now is she was still part of that order on some level of its continuance in time. And so she had sat on the seat of the Holy Ark. She had sat on the mercy seat. She was one of the priestesses that did this. And because at the time, the ark would have probably been, I'm assuming here, but I think it would have been still within Mount Sinai. So within an Egyptian priestess's reach. Not Egyptian, I'm sorry. She was a Jewish priestess, but in Egypt. There's an Egyptian connection. You know, all of this is so complicated, but there's an Egyptian connection. So she was there. She would have sat on that seat. She would have performed that function. And at least one time in her life as being a priestess of that order. So she would have received in her form, and she would have perpetuated that receipt, the vibrations of that initiation. And of not only initiation, but of that reception of the light codes. That doesn't mean that all the priestesses of the On were, you know, just complete arc beings. They couldn't have handled that much energy, but they had an aspect of it within their being. They had a code representation of that they could attune to, access, and through astral travel and remote viewing in its most extreme sense, they could have gone back and performed functions with the true ark in that way. So she would have obviously been one of those, and probably a very high level one. So when it says the ark of On was, or the Ark of the Covenant was transported there, that's what it's really talking about, according to what I'm receiving from the Thoth Extreme. And another thing I received this morning, which I really don't have, I haven't developed yet. Excuse me, I need a drink of water here. That was a long read. Is that Sha'Maia-NEAAF had 5 daughters and 2 sons during her lifetime. And I didn't receive who the father was of these children, or fathers, but 2 of the children were twins, non-identical twins, and it was a female and male, Brelinda and Jashim. And these 2 seem to be significantly important, perhaps in a to be continued video on this. But I'm bringing it up now because it seemed to be of importance when I started working on this piece. And so I believe that we will conclude here. I might be embedding some videos along with this one on the page. I placed this that would be reference materials or something. I'm going to take a look at things. But in any case, this is what the Thoth record up to this point has to offer on the subject of Sha'Maia-NEAAF, PrincessTea, and the Cathair stone, aka the stone of destiny. Thank you for listening.